I have created together David Hawkins Discovery CSI, which most people at this point, I think, are aware, starts right after our preview show here on Facebook and YouTube and Patreon and Periscope, and I forget even all the channels that we're on, but I think most people know that our show starts later this afternoon. We've done quite a lot to expose the activities of social engineers. How are you today, David? It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, I'm pretty good, Jason. It's good to be with you.
Yeah. And you know, one of the social engineering things that we've been talking about is the bizarre etymology of this term Mendenhalling. You identified that it first came onto your radar from this 1979 Washington Post article that we've discussed many, many times. The reference has oddly been removed, and the Washington Post has been adamant in their refusal to restore the article to how it originally appeared. They've got this March 25th, 2019 version where Mendenhall's baby has been replaced by Marcy's baby. And we've been forced by some of these social engineers to really explore the etymology of this Mendenhall term. You've come up with yet another connection today. What do you have for us, David?
Well, of course, there is a huge range of meanings, an impact actually on the United States between Mendenhalling as described in the Urban Dictionary of 2011, which our social engineers would like us to think is related to the activity of Rashad Mendenhall, a footballer, in 2011. And that's an activity, well, I don't know the appropriate words, but apparently dry humping is one description, which is a very odd thing for a footballer to do. And the implications of Mendenhall's baby as relating to Christine Marcy, who in 1979 was well on the way to become probably the most powerful bureaucrat and most dangerous bureaucrat in America's history. Over to you.
Yeah. So we've been aggressively contacted by now a variety of individuals, including one who went by the name Agent Serco, another moron who used the nickname Tom Thumb. None of these guys are actually trying to crowdsource the truth, but what they're trying to do is to utilize the mechanism that you and I have relied on for many years. When you previously were active with Able Danger, I believe you guys called it cloud-centric crime scene investigation. I've created my version of it, crowdsourcing the truth. And the idea is we put these questions, we put these situations out to our viewers to interact with us through the comments, through emails, through Twitter, through Facebook, through all these different things. And the idea is when we start to deal with information in terms of a scale of thousands of people looking at it and providing their knowledge, their background information, their personal experience, it becomes an incredibly powerful way to answer any question, really, to solve crimes, to look into unanswered questions of any kind. People have all kinds of variety in their experience, and when we combine that all together, it's super powerful. So these guys are trying to poison that well by coming at us with fake names and fake information and trying to throw us off.
Yeah, absolutely. And that rings a bell when you talk about that, where this company, Serco, we talk about a great deal, which injects news and media plays into government communication networks as part of a service for teaching government public employees and spokespersons to handle emergencies. And we are covered all the time with emergencies, but one of the things that come out of these emergencies, of course, is the injection of fake news through social networks. And these guys are very good at it, and the public ends up confused. It's over to you.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a lot of people, David, I think, who encounter you and this show for the first time sometimes find the information overwhelming, possibly even confusing. I've been noticing as the reach of the show increases, I'm getting questions from people who say, well, what is he even talking about? And of course, it's impossible for us to go back over all these topics each week. I definitely encourage people who have that question to visit your webpage, David. Your beautifully designed reverse CSI scripts.com is totally free for people to visit, and from there they can click on this little playlist link, and that's going to bring people to all of the YouTube videos that you and I have done together, and many of these questions will be answered. The connections between the term Mendenhall's baby, which appeared in the Washington Post. Editor, of course, is this guy, Marty Baron. Owner, Jeff Bezos. We last week were talking about the legacy of the Washington Post and the quite tragic history of the Graham family and what they might have known about the reference to Mendenhall. These social engineers have got us convinced that it's got to do with Rashard Mendenhall, the pretty well-known running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who, in a pretty unusual turn, left a very lucrative and successful position as a professional NFL player at a really unusually young age, 26. Then went on to be what is described as a television writer for HBO. In fact, it seems he's more of a story consultant for the television show Ballers, which is about professional football players, and it would seem that he pretty much just provides them with information regarding how things are actually done on a professional NFL team to provide authenticity for the show. We haven't been able to really confirm exactly what he does or what motivated him to leave the NFL or to engage in the dry humping that now bears his name, because I spoke to his brother, but he did not want to speak to us, and it leaves me with a lot of questions, particularly given that there's a lot of strange things about his production company. Most of the time, the people who run production companies want to make it sort of very accessible. Now, here's a new version of the Mendenhall humping, David. I hadn't seen this before. This one has 98,000 views, and curiously, it has also been posted on January 23rd, 2011. Now, the reason why I say this is curious is that this is coming from CD-ROM 34. Now, that's a play on compact disc read-only memory, so this strikes me as a pretty social engineering type of name for a YouTube channel, but that's a lot of views when we look at other videos related to Rashard Mendenhall and actual plays. I mean, this is a guy who was in 2 Super Bowls. It's strange that this short 14-second clip would have so many views, particularly on a channel with only 6,000 subscribers. What do you think about that, David?
Well, I think that's consistent with the techniques and the technology they've developed for social engineering. And one of the technologies, as we've discussed before, is this social engineering protection appliance that's been patented by a British outfit called Kinetic, Q-I-N-E-T-I-Q. And they talk there about parking information that is considered to be objectionable in various slots, and the implications of anything objectionable can be literally scrubbed. I don't know if they use that word in the patent, but basically deleted. So the amount of emphasis given to the 2011 interpretation of Mendenhalling is just bizarre. And the only explanation that I've been able to come up with is that when the original term, Mendenhall's baby, was planted in the Washington Post, it was done for a very specific purpose by the owner publisher, which would either have been Catherine Graham at the time, or her son Donald Graham, that I believe took over the sort of chief executive operator position in 1979. Now, just to run the clock back, if it was a steganographic clue, and I think we've discussed that previously, but just to emphasize that, it would have enormous implications if it told the public something of the nature of a warning, that there was something emerging in the United States administration in 1979 that represented something like what JFK talked about in the 1961 address to the Press Association at the Waldorf Astoria, where he said we, that's presumably the American people, are opposed by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that uses infiltration instead of invasion, and guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. So what I read into that is that Catherine Graham, or her son Donald Graham, realized that something that was unleashed about the time JFK made that speech, in my opinion, that was what got him killed. That is to say, he'd recognized there was a force out there. His words were a ruthless and monolithic conspiracy. But in engineering terms, and I have an engineering background, there's a big difference between accuracy and precision. So if I say you're a tall man, that might be accurate if you look at the general size of the people around you. If I say that you are 6 foot 6.5 inches tall, that's precise. So I believe it may prove that JFK's most important legacy is to be accurate about the forces that were aligning against the United States and the Republic that may very well have represented an existential threat to the existence or continued existence of the Republic. And what we can do, I think, in a sense, it's a privilege, Jason, that you and I have met up with our very different backgrounds, and we can perhaps provide precision to the accurate description of JFK that I believe got him killed. And that precision relates to the Bilderberg meetings that were started in 1954. So I don't know how much we need to focus on the activities of Rashad Mendenhall, but his behavior strikes me as something like, or no, let me put it another way. His position would make him a very attractive target for spot fixing the result of a game or something event during a game. Is that a legitimate statement?
Well, I think you had pointed out that the first thing that seemed odd was the amount of attention on that 14-second clip that really is irrelevant to the performance of the Pittsburgh Steelers or Rashad Mendenhall as a running back or a receiver or whatever he was. But it's so focused on that dry humping. I mean, it stands out, as you would say, David, like dog's balls, as something that is gaining so much attention.
Well, he's the author of The Ballers, isn't he? So.
Right. But it's gaining so much attention for something that is seemingly irrelevant. And the other thing that I find that matches that description, standing out so much for something that seems irrelevant, is the amount of attention that these various low IQ social engineers have put upon you and I and the discussion, it would be you and me, and the discussion that we have placed on this phrase, Mendenhall's baby, in the Washington Post in 1979 as written by Judith Mann, who unfortunately now is no longer with us because I'd love to talk to her about what she might have known about this. They've gone to the extent of actually contacting the Washington Post and changing it from Mendenhall's baby to Marcy's baby. I have been in contact with many people at the Washington Post, including the guy who's the editor of the Metro section, including the executive assistant of Martin Barron, the executive editor of the whole place. I've been in touch with their legal department, and they've told me there's nothing they can do to change this back to what it actually said in 1979, which seems very strange because without very much prompting at all, in March of this year, they changed it from Mendenhall to Marcy. So why is there suddenly nothing they can do to change it back?
It's not so much, I believe, there's nothing they can do. They could do what they wanted. They could put it back, but they've been told, or they've been terrified, or they've been frightened not to put it back, because that runs the phrase Mendenhalling or Mendenhall's baby back to the 1979 article,
right,
when it was associated with Christine Marcy, who at that time, under the Carter administration, was forming, and I believe she was one of the 7 charter members of the senior executive service,
right,
a bureaucracy that could ultimately fit the description, or at least the accurate part of the description, of John F. Kennedy. Because when John F. Kennedy said that we are opposed by a ruthless and monolithic conspiracy, One way of penetrating, again, he goes on in that fabulous speech. I think every American schoolboy or schoolgirl or whatever should study that speech for what it implies. He said in that speech that it goes on to this idea of infiltrating instead of invading, and guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. Now, who could in 1979 have engaged in such an activity, or put together such a conspiracy, and who might have recognized the danger that was coming at the Washington Post? And again, I think it comes back to Catherine Graham and her son, Donald Graham, because they would have seen, well, in the case of Donald the father, in the case of Catherine Graham, her husband, Philip Graham, committing suicide in 1963. Now, I'm always very worried. There's this extraordinary phrase of Arkanside, that when people commit suicide, putting one bullet, in their temple and shooting, right. I can understand that that's a suicide. But when there's not a lot of research into the circumstances of the suicide, and I can imagine there are 2 bullets in the back of a head, then you're not talking about suicide, you're talking about murder. And I think this organization of which JFK spoke is capable, and in fact has been structured as a very elaborate, very powerful, ruthless, monolithic murder for hire network that dates back to 1953. So shall I just explore what was going on in 1953, 54, 55?
Well, I think we're going to probably get more in depth on that, David, once we continue the broadcast over on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. We're going to spend a little bit more time here today in our preview video discussing some of the background and laying the groundwork, but it is very important that viewers who are interested in this material become sponsors not only of Crowdsource the Truth, but also of David's Patreon page. People can go visit patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and not only enjoy the exclusive content that David and I are bringing to you every Friday, but you can also look at David's posts. He's got daily posts on there. You can interact with the other people who are commenting on David's posts. And of course, what we're talking about, David, are the billionaires of the world who seem to all become media moguls. They own newspapers, they own social media sites, they own these vast social networks and media networks that basically control the flow of information. As you pointed out many times in the past, this allows them to create these artificial realities. It allows them to work with companies such as Serco to create these news injects and media plays. And I think what you and I have stepped firmly in the middle of, like a pile of dog excrement, is the transition of that from the major news media into social media. And I think that the Smith Modernization Act, I think that the development of the State Department's Global Engagement Center, I think all of these things indicate that there are companies and individual contractors around the world waiting in the wings for jobs, payments, and assignments to try to derail people like you and I who are using these social media networks to try to bring some truth to people. And something that we've identified just earlier today in our conversation preparing for the show is the link between Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post owner, Jeff Bezos, who is now advocating for Khashoggi and apparently went to Istanbul to seek justice for Jamal Khashoggi, and what possible connections any of all these guys might have to Mr. Rashad Mendenhall, who really is only peripherally connected to this in that his name was in an article on the Urban Dictionary intended to distract us away from that original reference to Mendenhall's baby in the 1979 article by Judith man, describing how you can now be a mother and a professional, and detailing the pregnancy during professional life of Christine Marcy.
Yeah, and this is very interesting with Khashoggi, because you and I discussed something of a metaphor about a place that you and I recently visited or approached when you came up to Vancouver, some of the evidence of the crime there, and the crime as described, as far as Jamal Khashoggi is concerned, because it would appear that the hit team flew in from Saudi Arabia and checked into the Movenpick Hotel, which is partly owned by Al Tawil. What's his name? How do you pronounce that again?
Al-Walid.
The Al Wali.
Yeah.
Okay, and they came in to that hotel at about 3 o'clock in the morning on the 2nd of October. It turns out that the local staff in the Saudi consulate, which is a short walking distance away from the Movenpick Hotel, had been told to stay at home, and a room had been prepared with a plastic sheet on the floor. And the team leaves the Movenpick Hotel and goes to the consulate and waits for Jamal Khashoggi to arrive. I don't want to go into the gory details, and of course it's secondhand, but it does appear that he was decapitated. He was tortured at first. He was decapitated with a bone saw.
Mm.
And that reminds me of the evidence that was found out at the pig farm, at the Picton pig farm, where there was a refrigerator with a bucket in it, with a skull split down the middle and a couple of feet inside. But just moving back to the connection with the owner, you end up with a year or so later, Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, which originally published that reference to Mendenhall's baby, out in Istanbul, demanding truth for the killers or the people associated with Jamal Khashoggi, which I think is kind of interesting, because the original story started with the article of 1979. Has it ended with what happened to Jamal Khashoggi? I think it's just begun.
Yeah, and I think that we're getting a little bit of fake news when it comes to Jamal Khashoggi, because he's basically being, lauded as a journalist and a guy who was speaking out against the regime there in Saudi Arabia. And, I'm looking for this quote from Al-Walid, where he said that Mohammed bin Salman had nothing to do with the murder of Khashoggi. And this is very strange, because Al-Walid and Jamal Khashoggi were definitely allies. We've seen them together. And, along the lines of what I was saying earlier, these billionaire dudes, they seem to like to own news agencies. And Al-Walid bin Talal had created a news agency that he intended to compete with Al Jazeera. And here we see Jamal Khashoggi hanging out with him. And they were pretty tight. We may recall that Jamal Khashoggi was also a Mujahideen jihadi, and that he was photographed in the 1980s with a rocket-propelled grenade on his shoulder, or, well, he's just sort of holding it. But this man is a terrorist, in my view. He is the nephew, or is it the son, of Adnan Khashoggi. And I believe he was posing as a journalist for the Washington Post as cover for intelligence operations and various activities that he carried out on behalf of his allies within the House of Saud. We know that Mohammed bin Salman is the youngest person to ever become king. He's the crown prince still, I believe, but he is in line to become king. John Cullen, another frequent guest on Crowdsource The Truth, has put forth a very compelling hypothesis that these people all had something to do with the devastating massacre in Las Vegas on October 1st, 2017. Now, David, I wanted to point out to our audience a connection that you and I made in our Discovery on the Fly process this morning that I haven't heard anybody else discuss. Jamal Khashoggi was infamously chopped up and dismembered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd, 2018, right? So yesterday was the one, or 2 days ago was the 1-year anniversary of that, and I believe that is the reason why Jeff Bezos is over there trying to seek justice for Khashoggi. But it caused me to realize that due to the time difference between Las Vegas and Istanbul, Turkey, if somebody wanted to exact revenge on an agent of al-Walid bin Talal under suspicion that he had played a role in perhaps a high-value target assassination attempt in Las Vegas, they might be sending a message to other co-conspirators to murder Jamal Khashoggi at approximately the same time 1 year later. So 9 a.m. in Istanbul, Turkey on October 2nd is 11 p.m. in Las Vegas, Nevada on October 1st. So is this a timed message of vengeance, David?
Wonderful, wonderful. And this is classic conspiracy discovery on the fly, because where else have we seen those bizarre timing synchronicities? For example, we've seen it, didn't we, with the images on the camera taken outside the Pentagon,
right,
with the date and the timestamp.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What I believe these people do, and it comes back to my point that JFK is making an accurate comment. That is to say, you are, and I say you Americans are opposed by a ruthless and monolithic conspiracy that disposes of scientific, military, intelligence, economic operations. All right. And for the great majority of the Americans, partly due to the brilliant social engineering, they don't even know it.
Yeah.
So up to now, I would say, until we came on the scene, JFK legacy, and maybe that's the most important thing, that speech is the most important words that he ever spoke, right? That we now have an opportunity to reverse engineer, which is what I tried to specialize in, the events that led to him making that speech, and forward to the present, where the appropriate action was not taken of the warning from 1961 and after he was disposed of, but just coming back to that synchronicity, and I'll put most of the details in the next part of the show. But in 1954, the Bilderberg Group and the Naval War College would have been in a position to synchronize asymmetric warfare attacks using the cesium fountain clock at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington in Middlesex, where it was invented.
But let me keep you focused on this part, David, because we don't want people to get too overwhelmed with information, and we've been making a little bit of an effort to sort of introduce ideas here during our preview show, and we're doing an extended preview today. We're going to be on a little bit longer here on YouTube and Facebook and Periscope and DLive and VK.com, because we really want as many people as possible to be aware that you and I do a show each week that people can see by going over to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. David, you and I are not billionaires. We don't own the Washington Post. We don't own Al Jazeera, CNN. We don't own any of these vast news outlets. So when we try to bring this information forward, particularly when it's controversial, we need the support of the viewers, the individual micro-sponsorship of each person, even if it's as little as $2 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month. We certainly don't want anyone to be put out financially in supporting the show, but we've seen that it's just not a practical method to rely on the advertising of major sponsors and to have someone like Google or Facebook control the flow of information and the flow of money. So by creating this really unique micro sponsorship program where you and I each have sponsors and the members of the audience can choose to become sponsors, it allows us to remain free of undue influence from any financial contributors who might otherwise sponsor the show. Now, David, the synchronicity that you're talking about was this image that you and I have viewed many times about the, what happened or what was alleged to have happened at the Pentagon. Curiously, there's this timestamp of September 12th, 2001. You've speculated that that is the result of the timestamp coming from some security system in the United Arab Emirates. Was that right?
No, the date stamp, interestingly enough, would be appropriate to Queensland in
Yes, right.
Australia, where Bill Clinton was staying at a Sheraton hotel in, I think it was Port Douglas.
Right.
The timestamp is interesting, and before we had the show, you started a little hunt for some timing to see if there was synchronicity between the Khashoggi murder and the events at Las Vegas and the MGM casino, and you found, and I think it's a very telling link. Well, as far as 1737-19 is concerned, that's the time in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates.
Right.
Where in its wisdom, the United States government during the Bill Clinton administration outsourced the operation, and this is the sense that I think JFK had, outsourced the operation of the National Visa Center to the British company Serco. Well, how dumb is that? Anyway, in 1737, the time 1737-19 would be the time in the Sheraton Dubai Creek Hotel. I used to live in Dubai in the Sheikh Al Latifah building overlooking the creek. Fascinating place to live. I spent 3 years there. But wouldn't it be interesting if there were people in the Dubai Creek Hotel and the Sheraton Hotel in Port Douglas who were placing bets on the time of impact of the weapons platform, forget whether it was a Boeing, on the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center and the body count in the command center, which was 125. America on 9/11, the American Navy, the United States Navy, and I have coined this term Mendenhall's baby Navy, all right? I don't know if people like it, but it doesn't really matter whether they like it or not. I think it's a powerful term. The United States Navy Command Center on 9/11 was decapitated. That is to say, the link between the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, and the 11 or so nuclear-powered aircraft carriers floating around the world was severed. Now, how serious is that? Are we really supposed to think that some clown in a cave in Afghanistan, right, a friend possibly of Jamal Khashoggi, was able to mount an attack that would decapitate the US Navy? And the action taken by the United States Navy and the military intelligence people is precisely zero. Over to you.
David, I would say that there's a good, strong argument to be made that there would be some sort of familiar connection between Osama bin Laden and Jamal Khashoggi. People may recall that Osama bin Laden was the leader of the Afghani Mujahideen. As I understand, Mujahideen just means army of God. And as we sort of advance through time, we can see that various iterations of these organizations simply change their name to confuse whoever might be observing them as to who is part of the organization and what the purpose is. This in and of itself is a form of social engineering. We've been contacted by lots of people that use fake names. David Swigert likes to use Dave Acton. He likes to use D. George Swigert. His brother George Swigert is out there under the name George Webb. This is confusing to the uninitiated, and people can easily think that they're more than a small group or be dissuaded from investigating what one group does, thinking that they're another. So there's some social engineering going on there. We're going to be starting our show on Patreon and Subscribestar at 1 p.m. Eastern today, David. And people who become sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth are going to enjoy quite a lot of exclusive content. It's also important that people who are watching us on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth go over to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and sponsor David. It's impossible to do these shows without David, and even if I'm talking a lot right now, some people are commenting that I'm not giving you a chance to talk. We're sort of experimenting with some changes in the format where the first show sort of sets a few things up, and then the payoff comes in the second show. Just to go back very quickly, David, to our friend Rashad Mendenhall. I want people to understand that we're not accusing Rashad Mendenhall of being directly involved in a conspiracy here, but it is interesting to note that he put out a very controversial tweet after Osama bin Laden was killed. And what do you want to tell us about that, David? Do you recall what that controversy was all about?
Yeah, he said, why are we celebrating when there is no evidence or proof in his mind that he's responsible for the demolition of those Twin Towers, right? And just while we are talking, and it's not a diversion, when we talk about different names, have you heard of the name Tim Osmond?
Yes.
Right? Okay, that's the name, or one of the names, used by Osama bin Laden.
Yes.
There's another name that might be very interesting, because it would appear that a man called Barry Svitoro knew Tim Osmond. And Barry Svitoro would later be better known as Barack Hussein Obama, who was in eastern Pakistan and Quetta, I believe, helping to smuggle Stinger missiles into Afghanistan to bring down Soviet helicopters. So this ability of British intelligence to create, how shall I put it, artificial reality messages and identities, that goes back many, many years, and anyone who doesn't believe me should watch the film The Man Who Never Was. The British is superb at that, and by the 1950s were able, I believe, to infiltrate men who never were, if you will, into perhaps a ruthless and monolithic conspiracy. Over to you.
Now, along those lines of a ruthless and monolithic conspiracy, there's going to be people along the way who get caught up in it, who are perhaps innocent, perhaps unwitting participants who maybe realize that something has happened and then no longer want to have anything to do with it. JFK's math teacher, what was his name again? Charles
McNeil.
Charles McNeil, he decided after inventing spot fix betting, he decided he wanted out of sports book gambling because the mob wanted to partner with his brain. Now, many people in the sports world, I'm not really much of a sports fan. I don't really watch NFL too much and didn't know anything about Rashad Mendenhall until we started discussing this whole thing. But it seems he retired at age 26 for some interesting reasons. Do we know why he retired?
Well, one of the issues that may have troubled him is the fumbling in the, was it the 14th Super Bowl or something like that? This was a huge event. Now, I think he lost quite a lot of brownie points amongst the fans when he fumbled. And maybe that played on his mind. I think the other possibility is he was given an offer he couldn't refuse. So if he was a high-paid footballer but prone to injury, or I believe he did get quite seriously injured, maybe a career as, what did you call it, as a consultant, to author, story consultant. Well, maybe he became a story consultant for some of the activities of, well, no, I don't want to impute anything evil to this gentleman, but he does appear to have done some very bizarre things, including dry humping a footballer, and I don't know how many times that's happened in front of a camera.
Right. I mean, the thing that we were trying to get to is that it is generally thought of as an unusual decision for him to leave. He had injuries, as all footballers do, but at the age of 26, there was no like major career-ending injury that, you know, this article doesn't say, oh, hey, his leg got snapped in half in a compound fracture and so now he's retiring. Most people were shocked in the NFL that he would leave. And I personally was kind of shocked that he would create a production company in Los Angeles, but yet he's impossible to reach by telephone. He's impossible to find on the Internet Movie Database, even in the pro version. And when we look up his production company, this Nappy Rose production company, it happens to be right inside a post office box shop right here, which is a strange place for a production company to be. Now, I could see famous people not wanting a lot of attention and having a P.O. box, but we also looked up the corporate status and it's not current. So there's a lot of strange things about this production company, particularly for someone who is currently engaged in the production in whatever capacity of the HBO show Ballers. I managed to find a phone number that I thought was Rashard Mendenhall's phone number, but turned out to be his brother, Hero, and he's a very polite guy. Again, I don't think Rashard Mendenhall is doing anything bad or evil. We just want to ask him, why did he leave the NFL, and why did he choose to dry hump that guy after that play, and does he have any idea why so many social engineers have put so much attention on something that seems totally inconsequential and irrelevant? There are so many views from accounts that don't seem like they should be having that many views. For instance, if we just put Rashard Mendenhall into YouTube, you know, we've got the top returns have 19 views. I mean, here's the Steelers training camp with Rashard Mendenhall. This has got 10,000 views, David. I mean, it seems like this is a subject of much more general interest, and it's, you know, again, it's coming from an account with not too many subscribers, but I'm trying to see if we can find, here's TYT Sports. Let's see something from sort of a major account and see, these are 16,000 views. Here's the one we just saw, CD-ROM. Here's another one of the dry humping with 107,000 views. You know, there's a lot of this dry humping that's been posted. I'm curious about this. Why is this the guy's most looked at moment here, and what causes it to have all these views? Hump seen around the world.
Well, I think, okay. Yeah, it's got to be, we got to look into the social engineering and, you know, that patent that talks about the creation and sharing of content on social networks using artificial reality messaging and geo-reference data. Basically, what I think this is driving public perceptions away from the recognition that Mendenhall's baby, back in the 1979 article, as applied to the most powerful and probably dangerous bureaucrat in America's government history, has geostrategic implications, whereas dry humping a football player on a pitch has no implications unless the public can maybe believe that's a more important and plausible explanation of the term Mendenhall's baby.
Yeah. I'm just trying, you know, there's no clips of the guy on ESPN, and, you know, I don't understand why there's so many views to videos. I mean, so here's the Steelers, 38,000 views on a channel called The Fumble. So this is a channel that's got 1.4 million subscribers, David. And the video with Rashard Mendenhall and Pittsburgh Steelers in the title with a hashtag has only 38,000 views. So I think we're pointing out that the metrics in terms of the number of people viewing these videos don't seem to match up with what you would logically think are subjects that fans of football would normally be searching for on YouTube. So, I mean, again, this is not conclusive evidence of anything. These are just curious data points that cause us to wonder, is this whole Rashard Mendenhall some sort of media inject? And, there's a lot of talk about Rashard Mendenhall fumbling the ball during that Super Bowl game that may have had some impact on the game. Historically speaking, we know that spot fix betting, when sportsbook operators or perhaps criminal characters want to manipulate that type of spot fix betting, they can influence players to do things during the game. Point shaving, that was a problem in the Boston College, I believe, basketball team was influenced by the mafia to do certain things during the game that they could then go place bets on. And when those seemingly unlikely things happened, someone would win big at a bet. So the question is, was there some kind of outside influence that caused Rashard Mendenhall to do certain things, specifically to dry hump that guy, so that social engineers could do a media inject to that Urban Dictionary to nullify the reference that they know is indelibly marked in the Washington Post in 1979, which I retrieved from the New York Public Library in this microfilm reproduction of the article. And they're doing everything they can to try to scrub that reference from the Washington Post online and try to erase it from people's memories.
Can I just make a point there?
Please.
This is very important, Jason, because we should ask ourselves, holding that picture that you've just got with September the 12th, oops, no, if you could just go back and hold the image with September the 12th, the date, timestamp, the one before you.
Where did I have that?
The other way.
Looking for it.
Anyway, it's got the date
Yeah.
stamp, September the 12th. No,
I've got
it. I still don't see it.
You got a bit of a delay there, but it's up.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there it is. Okay, just hold that picture. So the interesting question, if the Mendenhall's baby reference with Christine Marcy is important, is to ask, what was she doing when these images were taken? Well, she was the chief operating officer of the Small Business Administration and effectively had the financial controls over an organization called the Mentor Protege Program of the Department of Defense. The overall program from the Small Business Administration had her with controlling a portfolio of $50 billion worth of debt.
Wow.
Which was being funneled to small businesses that are owned by people deemed to be disadvantaged by virtue of their sexual orientation, ethnicity, religious beliefs, or color. And I'm saying that the mentor-protege relationship that was pioneered by Christine Marcy and John Kerry, apparently, is tailor-made for what is known as a man-in-the-middle attack, right? Because what you can do with the proteges, who are dependent on a line of credit, and that can be liquidated just at the drop of a hat, they could go out of business, right? So a company like Base One Technologies, which was a protege company of Serco, had the contract for the electronic upgrades to the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center. And I'm saying, or alleging, that the reason why Christine Marcy got Mendenhall in 1979 is that they had selected her to take over the operation, for example, of the Small Business Administration, which has been running since the 1950s, and infiltrate protege companies that did not have the same interests as the average American in the sanctity, if that's the right word, and the success of the Republic. I would say that the Small Business Administration is now working against the administration, the existence of the United States, and it should seriously, as I believe, what's his name, the president who got shot, Reagan, right? Reagan. I believe he wanted to dismantle the small business. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're going to be discussing, David. We're just about a little more than 10 minutes away from beginning our subscriber exclusive show on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. During that show, we're going to delve into some details about some of the other Mendenhalls that have now been linked to this concept of Mendenhall's Navy, and that may provide more answers to our viewers as to why Richard Mendenhall may have been selected as an unwitting participant in the cover-up of a steganographic warning that could have been placed in the Washington Post in 1979 and is now being desperately covered by everyone from the chief legal counsel to the executive editor to every moron social engineer who feels the need to email you or I or make a stupid video about anything that we say. So I hope that our viewers who are with us right now will join us and go over to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become sponsors so they can watch the rest of the show. People can also follow up on some of the things that we've been discussing if they're finding themselves confused, David, by anything that you or I have said. They can visit reverse-CSIscripts.com and they can click on this playlists tab and view all of the YouTube videos that you and I have done for the past several months and catch themselves up with exactly what is going on. People can also follow you on Twitter, David, which is a great way to stay in touch with David. He's on there at CSI Hawkins, and you can send him a direct message on Twitter or follow his posts and his tweets. And it's another good way to link up with each of our videos. David, thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to the insights that you're going to share on the episode here at 1 o'clock Eastern in just 10 minutes. I'll see you there, David.
Thank you very much, Jason. Looking forward to it. Bye now.
And thanks, everyone, for watching.